Prince William stood at the window of Kensington Palace, watching the last light of the afternoon fade behind the bare trees of the gardens. It had been a long day, the kind of day that made his shoulders heavy and his mind restless, but nothing had prepared him for the call that came just before dinner. His daughter Charlotte, only 9 years old, had been rushed to the hospital after a fall during a school activity. His little girl, his Princess Charlotte, had broken her wrist. He left immediately. No briefings, no schedules, no royal duties that mattered more than this. He pulled on his coat, said a few quick words to his security team, and was in the car before most of the staff even knew what had happened. The drive to the hospital felt both too long and too short. And too long because every second, without knowing how she was, felt unbearable. Too short because the moment he arrived, he would have to face the reality of seeing her in pain. The hospital corridors were quiet when he walked in, his presence noted but handled with discretion by the staff. A senior nurse met him at the entrance and led him through to where Charlotte was waiting. She was sitting up on a hospital bed, her small face pale, her right arm resting in a temporary splint. Beside her sat a nurse who had been keeping her calm, reading to her from a magazine and pointing at pictures of animals. Charlotte looked up when her father walked in, and despite everything, she managed a small smile. William crossed the room in a few strides and sat on the edge of the bed beside her. He did not say anything grand or royal. He simply held her left hand in both of his and asked her how she was feeling. Charlotte told him it hurt. She told him she had been trying to do something brave and it had gone wrong. She did not cry when she said it, but her bottom lip trembled in the way that told him she had already cried a great deal before he arrived. He stayed calm for her. That was what fathers do. Even when the inside feels like it is falling apart, the outside holds steady for the child who needs you to be steady. He stroked her hair and told her that brave things sometimes hurt, and that the hurt was proof she had tried. She leaned her head against his arm and closed her eyes for a moment. The doctor came in a short while later. He was a quiet, precise man with kind eyes and careful hands, the sort of doctor who had spent many years learning how to deliver difficult news without making it feel like a disaster. He greeted Prince William with a respectful nod and turned his attention immediately to Charlotte, checking her arm gently and asking her a few questions before he addressed her father directly. The X-rays had confirmed a fracture, a clean break at the distal radius, which is one of the most common types of wrist fractures in children who fall on an outstretched hand. The good news, the doctor explained, was that children's bones heal remarkably well. Their bone tissue is still growing and flexible, which means the body knows what to do and does it quickly. Charlotte would need a cast, and she would need to rest the arm for several weeks. But the doctor was confident that she would make a full recovery with no lasting damage. William listened carefully to every word. He asked questions. He wanted to understand the timeline, the level of pain she would experience, whether there was any risk of complications, and what signs he and Catherine should watch for at home. The doctor answered each question with patience and clarity. He could see in the prince's eyes the tension between the official composure and the private fear of a father, and he made a point of being as honest and reassuring as possible. After the doctor left, William turned back to Charlotte. He told her what the doctor had said in simple words that a 9-year-old could understand. He told her her arm would be fixed and that she would have a cast that her friends could sign. And Charlotte looked slightly more interested at that. She asked if she could pick the color. William told her that was entirely her decision, and she thought about it very seriously before deciding on purple. The cast was fitted with quiet efficiency by a nurse who was clearly used to working with children. She talked Charlotte through each step and explained what she was doing before she did it, which helped. Charlotte watched the whole process with intense curiosity, the way children do when something medical is happening to their own bodies, as though they are studying themselves. By the time it was done, she was holding her arm up and examining the purple cast with something close to pride. But while Charlotte was calm, William was already thinking several steps ahead. He had called Catherine the moment he left the school. Catherine had been in the middle of a private engagement when the call came, but she had excused herself and been on the phone within minutes. She wanted every detail. She wanted to know exactly how it had happened, who had been with Charlotte, whether the supervision had been adequate, and what the school's response had been. Her voice was controlled, but there was a sharpness in it that William knew well. It was the voice of a mother who was holding herself together by sheer will because falling apart was not an option when her child needed her. William had told her everything he knew, which at that point was not very much. The fall had happened during an outdoor activity. Charlotte had tripped or stumbled and put her hand out to break the fall, which is the most natural reflex in the world and also, unfortunately, one of the most common causes of wrist fractures. A teacher had been nearby and had acted quickly, contacting the school nurse and then the palace staff. By the time William had been informed, the school had already called for medical assistance. Still, William felt a strong and immediate need to speak to the school directly, not to assign blame, not in anger, but because he believed that when something like this happens to a child, the adults responsible have an obligation to face the parents directly, explain clearly what happened, and be honest about whether anything could have been done differently. That conversation would happen. He would make sure of it. He also asked the hospital staff to keep Charlotte's visit as private as possible for as long as possible. Not because the royal family wanted to hide what had happened, but because Charlotte deserved the chance to recover without the immediate weight of public attention. She was 9 years old. She had a broken wrist. She did not need cameras or headlines or the pressure of knowing that millions of people were watching and waiting. She needed her parents, her cast, and probably a good night's sleep. Catherine arrived at the hospital about 40 minutes after William. She came in quietly, without the kind of entrance that would have drawn attention, and went straight to Charlotte. The reunion between mother and daughter was private, and nobody in the room pretended not to notice that both of them needed a moment that belonged only to them. William stepped back slightly and gave them that moment, watching from a careful distance as Charlotte showed her mother the purple cast, and Catherine touched it gently, turning Charlotte's arm over in her hands, the way mothers do when they are checking something with their hands, because their heart is not ready to trust their eyes. Catherine spoke to the doctor herself after that. She asked the same kinds of questions William had asked, but also a few different ones. She wanted to know about pain management at home, about what Charlotte should and should not do during the recovery period, about whether any additional follow-up appointments would be needed, and about the specific signs that would indicate something was not healing properly. The doctor was thorough with her, and she listened with the focused attention that she gave to things that truly mattered to her. Outside the hospital, a small number of people had begun to gather. Word had spread quietly through the way that word always spreads about royal matters, through fragments and whispers and educated guesses. Most of the people who were there were not press. They were ordinary members of the public who happened to be passing, or who had heard something and come to stand quietly outside, not to intrude, but simply to be near. A few held flowers. One woman held a small handwritten card. It was a gesture that meant something, the instinct of ordinary people to show up when one of their own is hurting, even when that person is a princess. Inside, Charlotte was feeling considerably better than she had been 2 hours earlier. The pain medication had taken the sharpest edge off the discomfort, and the purple cast had given her something to focus on that felt more interesting than frightening. She had already decided which 2 friends she wanted to sign it first. She told her parents this information as though it were a matter of significant importance, which, at 9 years old, it absolutely was. William and Catherine exchanged a look over her head. It was the kind of look that carries a whole conversation in a fraction of a second. Relief, exhaustion, gratitude, love, and the particular quiet joy of watching your child be themselves again after you have spent hours holding your breath. Charlotte was fine. Not fine in the way adults say fine when they mean they are managing. Fine in the way children mean it, which is to say, completely and genuinely fine, already thinking about the next thing, already moving forward. I already passed the worst of it in the way that children can be when adults have done their job properly. The family left the hospital together that evening. Charlotte walked between her parents, her purple cast held slightly out from her body as though she wanted people to see it, or perhaps as though she was still getting used to its weight. William walked on one side and Catherine on the other, and they were careful not to make a fuss about the cast or treat her like something fragile, because she was not fragile. She was a child who had fallen and broken her wrist, and she had handled it with more composure than most adults would have managed. The statement that the palace released that night was brief and honest. It confirmed that Princess Charlotte had sustained a wrist fracture earlier in the day, that she had received excellent care, and that she was recovering well at home. It thanked the hospital staff for their professionalism and care. It asked for privacy as the family supported Charlotte through her recovery, and it said nothing unnecessary because nothing unnecessary needed to be said. William sat with Charlotte that night until she fell asleep. He read to her, not from anything grand or improving, just a story she had been in the middle of and wanted to finish. She fell asleep before the last chapter, which meant he sat there holding the book for a while after, listening to her breathe, watching the purple cast on her small arm, and feeling the particular mixture of things that parents feel after a crisis has passed and the child is safe and sleeping, and the world has settled back into something like normal. He thought about how quickly everything changes. At one moment the day is ordinary and full of ordinary things, and then a phone call arrives and everything that seemed important rearranges itself instantly, without asking permission. He thought about how lucky they were that it had been a broken wrist and not something worse. He thought about Charlotte's bravery, the real kind, not the performed kind, the quiet kind that shows up in the way a child holds still while a cast is being fitted, even though her arm hurts and she is tired and she would rather be at home. He turned off the light when he left her room. The palace was quiet. Somewhere downstairs, he could hear Catherine on the phone, probably with her own mother, talking through the day in the way women do, finding the words for things that need to be said out loud before they can be set down. He stood in the corridor for a moment, just standing, letting the day be done. Charlotte would wake up in the morning with her purple cast. She would go back to school in a few days. Her friends would sign the cast, and she would hold her arm out with that combination of pride and nonchalance that children have when they have something worth showing. The wrist would heal. The bones would knit back together with the quiet efficiency of a young body doing what young bodies are built to do. In 6 weeks, or 8, or 10, the cast would come off, and there would be a little ceremony of its removal, and Charlotte would flex her fingers and rotate her wrist carefully, and everything would be as it was before, except that it would not be. Quite. Because nothing ever is. And William would remember this day for the rest of his life. Not as a terrible day, because in the end, it had not been terrible, but as one of those days that teaches you something you thought you already knew, and teaches it again, more quietly and more firmly than before. That the people you love can be hurt at any moment, without warning, without reason. That your job as a parent is not to prevent every fall, but to be there when the fall happens. That a broken wrist is just a broken wrist, and it heals, and the child smiles, and the purple cast is secretly a little bit wonderful, and that is enough. That is more than enough.